Hi everyone and welcome back to another video of KV Investments. It's been a while since I've done a market recap video, so let's get back into it. The reason why I haven't uploaded much is because I've been working on adding extra stuff into this spreadsheet. So just as a sneak peek, if you come over here and unhide columns, you will see a lot more data, and it's all one big mess right now. Once I fix everything and tidy things up, I will use this data to do a little bit of day trading, and I will upload another video in the future to show you guys what went well and what didn't go so well, since more and more people are leaning towards that kind of trading. So keep an eye out for that video. So anyways, let's come back over here and hide those columns again, and let's focus on these columns over here. In this video, we will talk about what has happened in the stock market this week and what's scheduled to happen next week. The biggest one being the initial public offering of a second cannabis company in New Zealand. If you want to skip any part of the video, I will always leave a timestamps in the description. So to kick things off, the biggest news this week was that Auckland joins the rest of New Zealand at alert level 1 on Wednesday this week. So let's come back to the spreadsheet to see how the market reacted to that news. But before we do that, if you come to the second darker blue column and change it from lowest to highest, these are the companies that have not yet recovered from the pandemic. So this column represents the price change since the 20th of Feb. I picked 20th of Feb because that's the day before all the stock prices started coming down due to the pandemic. So for example, New Zealand Refinery Company was trading at $1.52 on the 20th of February. The current share price is 61 cents, which is 59% lower than what it was trading at on the 20th of Feb. So these are the companies that have not yet recovered. New Zealand Refinery Company, Sky TV, and Wellington Drive Technology are all down 50% from what it was trading at on the 20th. So even though the whole country has moved to level 1, there are still a lot of companies that are struggling to get back to what they were before the pandemic. Anyways, let's come back up. And if we have a look at the light blue column, we will see that these three companies closed at the same price they closed last week. So the news of Auckland going to level 1 really didn't have an effect on these three companies, which are the ones that are struggling the most right now. So if we play around with the light blue column, and if we change this from highest to lowest, these are the biggest gainers this week. Contact Energy was up 13% since last Friday. Plexer Group was up 10% this week, and Westpac Banking was up 9%. If we come up over here and change this from lowest to highest, and there really isn't that many companies in the negatives this week. So overall, it's been a positive week for the New Zealand stock market. The biggest drop being around 3%, and that was ATF Pharmaceuticals and the Warehouse Group. The Warehouse Group is probably up here in this list because this week they released an unaudited result for the year, and in that they reported the net profit after tax was down 32% from last year, and they also announced that they will not be paying a dividend for this year. So that's probably why the Warehouse Group is one of the top decliners in the New Zealand stock market this week. Speaking of dividends, looking at the ex-dividend dates coming up next week, we only have one, and that's from Private Land Property Fund. So if you want to receive a dividend from these guys, you had to have bought into the company before Friday next week. Next week, we also have these companies scheduled to release their financial statements on these days. The companies on the purple box are companies over in America. So by the time they release their statements for us over here in New Zealand, it'll be the next morning. So on Tuesday, we have Johnson & Johnson, JP Morgan, and Delta Airlines releasing their financial statements, which to us over here in New Zealand will be Wednesday morning. These aren't the only companies that are scheduled to release their financial statements. These are just the ones that I picked out to be the most interesting. Johnson & Johnson had a huge role in the COVID-19 response over in America and also globally. Let's come back to the spreadsheet. JP Morgan and Delta Airlines has also had interesting times during this pandemic. And on Wednesday, we have Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and another airline company, United Airlines Holding. And on Thursday next week, the company that I'm most excited about will release their financial statement, and that is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. If you know about that company, then you already know how big they are. And if you don't know about that company, one thing that I'm excited about is that they have a huge part in making computer chips for the automotive industry, and they also is a big name in providing 5th generation, also known as 5G network chips for customers. So these are two trends that are in demand right now, and in my opinion will continue to be in demand in the near future. Let's come back to the spreadsheet. And also on Thursday we have the Rua Bioscience initial public offering. Rua Bioscience is a medicinal cannabis company, so that means that there will be two cannabis companies in the New Zealand stock market. And whether you agree with the use of cannabis or not, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about the industry and compare Rua with Cannasouth. The reason why I want to talk about this IPO is because last year in May, Cannasouth was offered to the public at 50 cents a share, and since then it has gained investors about 142%. And now Rua Bioscience is also being offered at the same IPO price of 50 cents a share. So would this be your second chance to gain a triple-digit return? Well, let's talk about it and go through as much as we can. First, I want to talk about the industry. Cannabis companies around the world are struggling, but they are growing. The reason why I said struggling is because if you look at any cannabis company's balance sheets, their income is painful. Majority have big net losses and will continue to have big net losses as they continue to invest in equipment, property, research, and other stuff. And that's just how it is with new companies, especially for cannabis companies who struggle to find fundings from banks because of the nature of their business. As a matter of fact, in Rua's product disclosure statement, they stated that Rua expects that it will continue to be loss-making for at least the next 2 years. So they don't expect to be profitable for at least the next 2 years. Another reason why I say struggling is because cannabis companies are restricted by the local and external government legislation, as there are still tight restrictions around the use of cannabis. For example, in the US, out of 50 states, only 33 have legalized cannabis for medicinal use, and only 11 out of those 33 have legalized it for recreational use. And medicinal and recreational is an important difference which most investors seem to ignore, but we'll get to that in a second. But first, I want to talk about the trends. Even though cannabis companies are struggling to show a profit, there is a new wide acceptance for the use of cannabis by the general public. Have a look at this study, which looks at interviews conducted over 5 decades in America. It clearly shows the trend that people are more and more accepting of the use of cannabis. People were asked if marijuana should be made legal, and starting from 1969, it was a clear no. 84% of the sample said no, and this slowly changed around, and now 66% of the people interviewed says yes, 32 says no, and 2% has no opinion. So along with this trend, it is likely that more and more states will legalize the use of cannabis. I couldn't find anything like this to show the trend in New Zealand, but the latest poll shows a much more closer split for the referendum coming up, with 46% saying that they would vote to legalize cannabis and 44% said they will vote against it. Okay, now let's talk about the referendum coming up. If you go to the official government website, you will see that this referendum does not affect the use of medicinal cannabis, which is already legal. And if you go down a bit further, they stated that again, medicinal cannabis will not be affected by the outcome of the referendum. And the reason why I'm pointing that out is because both Cannasouth and Rua Bioscience are focused on producing medicinal cannabis products. They are not focused on creating products for recreational use. Having said that, I think this referendum will impact the two cannabis companies in the New Zealand stock market. Investors might use it as a buy or a sell signal. Now, this could be for whatever reason. They might not know that Cannasouth and Rua Bioscience were only planning on producing medicinal cannabis products, or they might have thought that the two companies might venture on to create recreational products to boost their income if the bill was passed. Or they might have not realized that most of their customers are overseas anyways. Honestly, it could be for so many reasons, but it is important to predict investors' behaviors. I have said this many times in the past, and that's because investors are the ones who move the stock price. Have a look at this news clip.
Publicly traded shares of companies like Tilray and Cannabis Growth after a horrible year are up significantly over the last week. As states like California and New York are deeming cannabis essential, especially for medical patients. Here's a couple of stats.
So this news started breaking out on the end of March this year. Now, if you come back home to New Zealand, when this type of news was breaking out, it broke this little downtrend Cannasouth was in. Even though Cannasouth wasn't selling any products at the time like those other American companies mentioned in the news articles. But it was enough to break the downtrend, and Cannasouth started seeing a growth of around 58%. This jump right here was due to a different news as they announced significant cultivation joint venture with an overseas company. Anyways, the news that wasn't directly related to the company still had an effect on the company's stock price. So the news of the referendum will probably affect the stock price of both Cannabis and Rua Bioscience. And it depends on what you think will happen. I'm just speculating that it won't pass. Anyways, let's talk about what might happen in the short term once the IPO is over and shares start trading in the secondary market. If you have a look at what happened to Cannabis, the stock price actually dropped after the initial public offering. And then when it came time to raise capital again on April 15th, Cannabis offered more shares for New Zealand shareholders and wholesale investors in Australia at only 38 cents per share. So it was offered lower than the IPO. And if you come back and have a look at the stock price action, the shares actually dropped even further by 14% due to that news. But since then, it had a gain of 119%. Now, since Rua Bioscience is a very similar company, would the stock price behave the same way as Cannabis did? Probably not, because Cannabis was our first cannabis company to be listed in the stock market, and it had a good run recently, which would definitely be considered by investors. There may be a lot of fear of missing out. This is how the dot-com bubble started. The big gains seen in companies in the same field caused a lot of investors to grab whatever they thought was the next best thing. And it was actually working because people had the same mentality until the bubble burst. Times have changed, but has people's behavior changed? Probably not. But it's up to you if you decide you want to ride this cannabis hype. I just want you to consider all the factors such as referendum, investors' behaviors, trends, availability of resources, and competition is something that we haven't talked about yet. According to the Herald, there are 6 big players in New Zealand alone, not just the 2 listed in the stock market. And I said New Zealand alone because most of these companies are looking to export their products overseas, where they are likely to face more competition from local companies as well as from other countries looking to export into the same country. For example, Rua has made some partnership agreements with a company in Germany, but there are a lot of other countries that are already exporting a lot of marijuana into Germany. Germany reported they have imported more than 4,000 kilograms of medicinal cannabis during the first half this year. Yes, there is a demand for cannabis and it seems to be growing, but what's also growing is the number of competitions coming into the cannabis industry, and people are already talking about how these companies which are more well established will undercut New Zealand's growers. Anyways, if you think Rua Bioscience stock price will go up after the IPO and you want to take part in this IPO and you have a Sharesies account, all you have to do is fill out this page and make sure that you have enough money in your Sharesies account at 2 p.m. next Thursday. I will leave a link to this page in the description below. It will be the first link. And if you don't have a Sharesies account, use the second link in the description to sign up with Sharesies. If you use that link, you will get free $5. If you are going to take part in this IPO, make sure you do more research. We have only scratched the surface. And as always, I am not a financial advisor. This was just for entertainment purposes only. And make sure you only invest in what you're comfortable with losing. See you in the next videos. Until then, enjoy level 1. Bye.